One early evening in January of 1981, a young woman named Ivana was getting ready to attend a dance later on that evening. What she didn't know was that something evil was lurking around that night, and that the events of that evening would change the headlines across the country for the next several years. But before we get started, my name is Andrea Scott, and if you like scary stories based on true events, then please do stick around because that's what I do and I will be uploading weekly. Just like before, I will be showing you some sensitive material, so viewer discretion is advised. Now go order yourself a pearl milk tea with extra tapioca and let's get started with our episode 3. The 30th of January 1981 was a very special day for a young, dark-haired girl named Ivana. She and a couple of her friends were attending a dance later on that evening, which was held at a local zoo in Brno in Czechoslovakia. The main attraction for the women, apart from dancing, drinking and generally catching up, was to participate in a draw where they could win some exciting prizes, namely the top prize being a live monkey. Ivana tried going on about her day normally, but she was really secretly wishing that the event would come sooner. And finally, at around 6 p.m, Ivana finished her daily task and she ran up to her room and she started getting ready. She put on her favorite music and she was applying her makeup and doing her hair, and ultimately she put on a dress that she had picked several days before. And when she was ready to leave the house, Ivana says goodbye to her parents, puts on her favorite pair of heels, and she sets off for the tram station. When Ivana got to the tram station, which is about a 10-minute walk from her house, her friend was already standing there, so the two greeted each other and they hugged, and after a couple of minutes of chit-chatting and waiting for the tram, it would arrive, they would hop on, and it would drive them to the nearby zoo where the dance was taking place. When they got to the dance at around 8 p.m, they instantly knew they were going to have a good time. The venue was really nicely dressed up, there were already a good few people there, and it just looked like a very nicely organized event. And soon enough, Ivana and her friend that she arrived with, they would mix and mingle with the people there and they would find their other friends. And so that they, danced all night and they chatted. And even though they didn't win the top prize, they still laughed a lot and generally thought it was a great success. And when it was time to go home, Ivana said goodbye to all of her friends and she left the venue with the friend that she had arrived at the dance earlier on. And so the two women went to the tram stop where they waited for the tram to arrive. And then after several minutes of a ride, they arrived at their final destination. There, the two women said goodbyes and they started heading towards each of their houses. For Ivana, she had done this walk many times before, and so that even though she had to walk for about 10 minutes and she would have to cross a small park, she was still not bothered because there were a couple of street lights, but generally this area was quite deserted. And so Ivana didn't hesitate, and when she approached the park, she just walked in and continued on her journey home. Little did she know that at that time she was not alone. A couple of minutes later, when Ivana was just about halfway through the park, she heard some voice trying to talk to her. At first, Ivana tried ignoring them because it was really late and all she really wanted to do was go home. But as the figure continued speaking at her, Ivana thought, you know what, this seems way off, I'm just going to run for my house. And so she started running away. However, this decision of hers really enraged that person. And when they saw Ivana run away, they would start charging after her. And soon enough, that person would reach Ivana and they would muffle her mouth so that she couldn't scream out for help, and they would ultimately knock her down, pinning her underneath the attacker's body. At first, the attacker, who was a young man, tried assaulting Ivana, but he wasn't able to do it, and so he started strangling her instead. And when she finally went limp and stopped fighting, he would pull out his knife and would stab her 39 times. He then retrieved his knife and would cut out portions of Ivana's body. And when he was satisfied with the act he was just after committing, he would dump Ivana's body into the nearby bush and he would just walk away. Ivana's brutally murdered body would be found the following morning by a person walking by. They called police to the scene, and they would immediately start searching the area for any clues they could find. But even though as they searched Ivana's remains, they didn't really have much to go on at all. There was no DNA samples left at the scene, and CCTV at the time wasn't really a thing, and especially in such a remote and residential part of the town. The only thing that was unusual about this crime scene was the way Ivana's body parts were removed. This was a very clean cut. And so the police would immediately start targeting suspects with professions like surgeons or butchers or hunters, who all would be very adept at using a knife, and they could handle a larger body. But even after they started interviewing people that could potentially fit the bill, they soon would reach a dead end, and the case would go cold. This obviously meant terrible news to Ivana's family. They were heartbroken that their young daughter was taken away from them, and they really wanted to find the person that did this. But there was nothing they could do. There were no leads to go on. And even after the father and the boyfriend were interviewed, because usually those would be the two suspects police would go after first, there still were no additional leads discovered. Soon enough, the public would be made aware of this assault, and the pictures from the crime scene would be circulating the country, and everybody was just very scared because the murderer was nowhere to be found. It wouldn't be until almost a year after when the police would finally get a tip that would blow Ivana's case wide open. If you're still watching this, then I wanted to ask if you would consider subscribing to my channel. This would give me a great indication that more people are enjoying my content, and in turn I would be able to make more videos. You know, I do put a lot of time and effort into making these, so your support really does go a long way. Now let's go back to our story. Later in 1981, a young detective named Lubomir Fiala was after getting assigned to the district of Prague 5. And on late afternoon of October the 3rd, Fiala's supervisor got a call that a woman's body was discovered nearby the local hospital with the clear signs of sexual assault. So the pair of detectives dropped everything and hurried to the scene. There they would await the senior members of the detective team, who were Jiří Markovič and Antonín Jarolimek. Both of these investigators were very well known to all policemen, because they were seen as the absolute best among their kind. The body found would be identified as a 50-year-old Anna, and police would uncover several clues around the crime scene, including DNA such as sperm and saliva. Her dress that she had been wearing to an event that evening was cut with one clean movement at the back. And this again, just like in the case of Ivana, brought up the idea of the murderer possibly being someone like a surgeon or a butcher who would be very adept at using a knife. The detective Fiala was assigned to interview everybody around the hospital, which was about 250 people that were staying in the nearby accommodation, and he was given 14 days to do this. There, the young detective would strike his very first bit of luck. One of the nurses would confirm that about 3 days prior to this murder, she was followed by a man who clearly wanted sex from her. Luckily, the nurse was very close to her dormitory, and so she went inside and closed the door right in front of him. She still managed to get a very good look at him, because the person would still follow her up onto the door where he was now standing, looking at her through the glass panel. And so Fiala decided to follow up with an identikit, which is a reconstruction of person's facial features based on witnesses' testimony. This would have been done by someone much more senior than Fiala, but because that person wasn't available at the time, Markovič agreed for Fiala to do it because they needed to do this as soon as possible. And so Fiala would take the nurse into the police station, and after several hours of interviewing her, he would be now holding a facial reconstruction of the attacker. It would turn out, however, that this man had nothing to do with the murder, but he would commit a crime very soon, and this identikit made by Fiala was used to identify him, and so Fiala quickly became someone who was sent for quite regularly. A few months later, in February 1982, Fiala was interviewing a person who claimed that he had murdered a body very near the place where Anna's body was found. However, as he was being interviewed, Fiala knew that this person was not the killer they were looking for. Firstly, it would be confirmed that at the time of murder, this person was actually being held at psychiatric ward at Bohnice, which is another district of Prague. And also this person didn't quite know many details about the ins and outs of the crime scene, and he didn't even know how the victim got attacked. But he did manage to confess one thing, and that was the way the woman was murdered, with her own pantyhose. Now Fiala knew that this piece of information could have been only known by either the murderer or someone who did visit the crime scene. And so Fiala continued questioning this man, who after a while did change his story and confirmed that actually it was his friend that had told him about this murder. And this man would also give Fiala his friend's name, Ladislav Hojer. And so Fiala was very eager to question Hojer, because again, either he was the murderer or he was at the crime scene. And so Hojer was brought in for questioning on the 11th of January 1982 at approximately 3 p.m. Fiala managed to track him down into a local shop where he was working as a glassmaker. And to Fiala, Hojer's job was already giving a very good indication that he too would know how to work with the knife. However, his entire profile and demeanor was proving hard for Fiala to believe that the man standing in front of him could be capable of such a gruesome crime. Hojer, who was almost 24 years old at the time, was really coming across as someone who was shy and much more subdued. He and his young brother would live in a small flat in Prague after both of their parents passed away and their stepfather would leave them. Hojer's IQ would be measured at 88, which is really at the lower level of just average. And he was quite known to live a life of a loner because he was no longer living with his brother who had left to join the military service. As Hojer was being questioned, it became very clear that he did not have many friends or figures of authority in his life. And it was for this reason that Hojer quickly became quite friendly with the police officers. And so over time, Hojer thought that he could just tell them everything. And by 6 o'clock that very afternoon, Hojer finally confessed to murdering the 51-year-old Anna. At that point, Detective Markovic stepped in and he would begin with his own questioning. And what he would learn over the next several hours and months would shock everyone around them. It would turn out that Hojer never really had a proper relationship with the woman. He had been always very shy in their presence and he didn't quite know how to talk to them. And so whenever he would try and approach a woman, he would often be laughed at and ridiculed. He had tried placing an ad in a local newspaper and he did eventually meet up with the woman. But when the pair finally met, the woman would soon leave because Hojer was clearly not whom he described to be. Another time, when Hojer was attending a party, a couple of his friends talked a girl into sleeping with him. But when the pair got into a room together and the woman started undressing herself, Hojer suddenly snapped. He threw the girl through the glass door and he stormed off. And so these incidents really made him over time despise the opposite sex. He would often be quite vulgar and rude about the way he would describe them, and he would often fantasize about women begging him for mercy as he was trying to assault them. And soon enough, these fantasies of his would turn into reality. Hojer would then go on to describe to Markovic what really happened between him and Anna. Now Anna, even though she was 51, she did not look her age, and so Hojer thought that she was actually much younger. He spotted Anna returning home from an event that evening. Hojer confessed that the way he was picking out his victims was by the way they were attractive, and also, in his own words, whether they looked like they had a good skeleton. And so he decided to approach her and ask her for sex. When Anna refused his very direct offer, he attacked her by dragging her into the nearby bush, and there he began assaulting her. And when he was finished with her, he would strangle her with her own pantyhose so that she could not later on identify him. When he was finished with his act, he would cover her body with her own coat and he would return home. Hojer did say that after a while, he was bothered by the fact that the crime had happened literally on his doorstep because he only lived a few meters away from there. And especially when the information about the murder became a public knowledge, He was very afraid that someone might recognize him. And so Hojer tried confessing to several men at the local pub, but nobody was really taking him seriously because he just didn't seem like the type that could do it. And so Markovic would spend a significant time with Hojer over the next several months, because he really wanted to get to the bottom of his story. And the two became quite close, even to the point where Markovic was thinking of inviting Hojer over for dinner. And so, shortly after the Christmas in 1982, Hojer wrote to Markovic where he promised to tell him everything. And soon enough, the reconstruction of his heinous crimes would begin. Hojer started telling Markovic about the murder he committed near Košice in 1980. After the police confirmed that there indeed had been an investigation into a murder of a woman, they then compared the details that Hojer was telling them, and they would find a match. Hojer confessed that at the time he did not even want to talk to her. He just decided to assault her right there and then. But as he was strangling her, he ejaculated prematurely, and that made him lose interest in her completely. As the woman went limp and was no longer trying to free herself, Hojer proceeded to bound her body with the wire he had found nearby, and then he attached a large stone to her breasts. He then picked up her body and threw it into the nearby pond, where it sank down to the bottom. Hojer also noted that before he left the crime scene, he went for a swim into that pond. When the body was found almost 2 months later, it was so badly decomposed with the head and the hands severed that it was impossible to identify her. There were no signs that the woman had ever had a surgery or suffered any larger injuries, and so that there were no medical records to identify her. And to this date, we still have no idea who she was. The next murder Hojer confessed to was that of Eva Rohlenova in Děčín in 1978. This would turn out to be Hojer's first murder ever. Eva, who was married for the 3rd time, left her husband earlier that day after they went to the cinema and went on to meet her lover. That man, however, changed his mind about their meeting last minute, and so now Eva was standing there alone. Hojer was planning to visit Děčín for some time now, and so that when he saw Eva all on her own and very attractive, he decided to pounce. He quickly moved towards her and stunned her by knocking her down on the ground. There he strangled her, and when she was dead, he tried assaulting her, but he wasn't able to do it, and so he just masturbated over her dead body. And when he was finished, he would pick up a single nettle and place her inside of her vagina, and then he just left. The local police would later confirm that where Hojer described he had attacked her was actually about 1.5 meters away, where Eva's broken glasses had been found. Hojer would also tell the police about the time he murdered a 25-year-old student, Ivona. Now, this was a very well-covered case at the time, and it actually resulted in 2 people taking their own life, as they were not able to produce any evidence that they, in fact, could not have been the killer. And so this case was reconstructed by the help of actually sending a train on the route of Prague to Děčín, so that Hojer could get on with the police and he would tell them everything, which brought a lot of new details and information to the light. Hojer saw Ivona as she was parting her way with her husband, who was a military officer. Shortly after the train set off, Ivona had to go to the bathroom, and this is where Hojer followed her, and he got into the bathroom with her, and there he strangled her with her own shawl. After he was done with that, he again tried assaulting her, but there wasn't really that much space in the small cabin, and so again, he just masturbated over her dead body. And when he was finished, he would throw one of her shoes out of the window, he would close the compartment and would leave. Hojer was also at the military service at the time, and so he was wearing his uniform. So when he was leaving the train, he would be actually spotted by several passengers. And they all would confirm that they had seen this young, tall man in a uniform, but that was all the details they could have given police. And so police, they would start questioning as many officers as they could. But Hojer was actually never questioned, because he had a bulletproof alibi, since nobody at the station saw him leave that day, and so officially he was accounted for. Soon after this, the police was unable to continue in the reconstruction process as it was before. Hojer was getting too involved in the act himself, and so the women had to be replaced with mannequins over time. The public, who often watched the reconstruction take place, were shouting at the police to give them Hojer so they could punish him for all the crimes he had committed. And Hojer, he was just standing there and he wasn't understanding as to why the crowds were so angry with him, because he had no idea how severe his crimes were. He also possessed a very twisted sense of humor. One day, as he and the investigators were traveling to one of his crime scenes, Hojer asked them whether they would mind stopping and picking up the 2 hitchhikers they were just after passing by, so that he could assault them and kill them quickly, which would mean that the police could arrest him there and then. Finally, Hojer would confess to killing the 18-year-old Ivana and went on to share the gruesome details of the act he committed on the night of the 30th of January 1981. Hojer arrived in Brno earlier that day and spent the majority of his time just walking around the city exploring it. It wasn't until about 3 o'clock in the morning when he spotted the very attractive Ivana, who was now walking alone. And so he had this idea that maybe he could spark a conversation with her. But after she ignored him and even tried running away, Hojer, who suddenly felt this rage inside him, caught up to her and dragged her deeper into the park where he tried assaulting her. But yet again, he wasn't able to do that. And so he strangled her instead and stabbed her 39 times with his knife. But he thought that this time it wasn't enough just to masturbate over her dead body. And so he hatched another plan. He pulled out the knife out of Ivana and started carefully removing her breasts. Then he placed these into a plastic bag that he had on him, and he continued removing her inner thighs, anus, and the inner and outer parts of her genitalia. When he was satisfied that he had everything he wanted, he put all the parts he just removed from Ivana into the plastic bag, and he stashed her remains into the nearby bush just to make sure that nobody would find her anytime soon. And after that, he just left. After Hojer returned back to his flat in Prague, he took out all the parts of Ivana from the plastic bag and laid them neatly out on his table. There, he shaved off the pubic hair from Ivana's genitalia and he began to have sex with them. He would continue to repeat this for over a week, until he decided that it was the time to try something different. He took out the biggest pot he had in the kitchen, filled it with water, added some salt, and then placed Ivana's remains into it and began cooking them. Hojer confessed that he tried eating Ivana with some mustard, but as he hadn't liked the taste, he stopped and flushed all of her remains down the toilet and threw the pot away. In the end, Ladislav Hojer confessed to 5 murders and 18 assaults, of which would ultimately send him to prison. Since he was deemed to be highly dangerous and never be able to recover or have any sort of remorse or empathy, he would be sentenced to the death by hanging. Hojer was very afraid of death, and so on the day of the sentence, he tried everything he could to prevent it. But ultimately the sentence would be carried out, and so on the 7th of August 1986, Ladislav Hojer finally paid for the crimes he had committed with his own life. While taking someone else's life can never bring the dead ones back, I do hope that all the families and friends of the victims managed to find a bit of peace in the fact that Hojer would never be able to hurt another human being ever again. While I don't know any of the friends and families of these victims, I still wanted to share this story with you because it is very important that we raise the awareness of the fact that we should, at all times, be aware of our surroundings, and we should never walk alone, especially during dark. If you can, either arrange for a taxi or someone you know to come and pick you up. It is always a better option to skip the last couple of drinks and be able to afford a taxi ride home than walk on your own in the dark. If you have any tips on how to get home safely, then please do share them with me and the community in the comments below. Until next time.